Hey everyone, we're super excited about this guest today, Jarod with Comet Fuel. We're excited about just the experience and words of wisdom he's going to provide to the Healthcare Digital Marketing Podcast audience. Before we kind of jump into this, Jarod, I would just love for you to open up and just kind of tell the audience who you are.
Yeah, of course. And, thank you for allowing me to be here. So, my name's Jarod Spiewak. If anyone didn't know that by now, primarily what I do is I'm the founder and lead strategist for Comet Fuel. We're a digital marketing agency that focuses on Google Ads, PPC, and SEO. Also, Google, because, let's be honest, who doesn't use Google?
Right.
That's primarily where we focus ourselves, and we're a niche boutique agency. Simply, what that means is we're a small team that focuses on working with a small number of clients, and that's just the style that we like.
Awesome. And so, Jarod, when you say, I guess, like, do you have in your niche, do you have specific type of clients that you love working with, or is your targeted audience?
Yeah. So over the past just under 9 years that I previously freelanced and eventually on my own agency. I've done a lot of work with professional service businesses. So I've worked with about 200 different law firms. I used to be the lead strategist for a law firm marketing agency.
Okay.
I've done a lot of work with accountants. I've done a lot of work in the medical field. I've done a lot of work with uh, uh, I would say those are probably the three most prominent with between accounting, legal, and medical within the professional service industry. And then
Okay.
we also have part of the business that works with SaaS and e-commerce.
Nice, nice. So, how you and I think, like, I first heard about you was on Daryl's Lion Zeal podcast, and you kind of alluded to it with freelancing. So one episode I saw that you made crazy amount of money on Upwork. Can you kind of? I think that's amazing because we use Upwork for pretty much all of our contacts as it relates to freelancers or contractors to help us execute a lot of our strategies. So I would love for you to just share that story of like how you got on Upwork and that whole process of growing your business from there.
Yeah, sure. So let me kind of start halfway through my entire career, which is when I kind of got started on Upwork, which was that I was at the time I was working a corporate marketing job. I was in school going for my marketing degree. I at this point I may have actually graduated by now. I don't recall exactly when. I was close to graduating where I had just graduated, and ultimately kind of hated the corporate job. Just wasn't for me. I
Right.
thought when I got a corporate job, I was 17 at the time. I thought, okay, great, time to climb the corporate ladder and I'm set for life. Very quickly, I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. So what I ended up doing was I was like, I need to find something else. I need to do something else. And so I was investigating at the time, do I want to do web development because I enjoy that side of things? I thought I was going to possibly get into information security. On the more like I guess you could say like the more like white hat hacking side of things, because I just really enjoyed the technology side of things from that. So I was playing around with a lot of different things, learning a bunch of different things. But my background was also marketing, so I just freelancing. Found Upwork.com, much more obscure site at the time because it had recently merged with Elance and Odesk to
Yep.
become Upwork. So I went on there. I was like, okay, great. Let me charge people $10 an hour. Nobody hired me. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll do $5 an hour. So I started working for about $5 an hour. I was offering a bunch of different marketing services from SEO to ads to social media, etc. And eventually SEO was where I started spending a lot of time initially. And about 6 months or so on that platform, I'd increased my rate to about $20 an hour or so. And I had gotten a full time offer from another marketing agency. So I did
Nice.
that quite a bit, which brought in a decent amount. And then at the same time, because I had that solid gig on there, my profile started to grow because the earnings kept going up and up and up. And that's one of the things that people look at a lot. And so as I decided, I think eventually I want to do something on my own, I started gaining more and more traction on that platform. And because I was an early adopter, I had my systems and processes built out pretty well for it, as a lot more, primarily within the SEO field, a lot of people were from like India, Bangladesh, etc., offering like $3, $5 an hour work, which was, not always the most high quality of work. And so it was
Right.
pretty easy for me to get jobs. And they're just saying like, hey, I'd love to jump on a phone call with you, because nobody was doing that at the time. So
Awesome.
very quickly, over the course of, when I really wanted to take this and kind of do my own thing, I would say I was making about $8,000 $9,000 a month on the platform as a
Wow.
freelancer, which is pretty good.
Oh yeah.
And then over the course of 2, 3 months, I over doubled that to about $20,000 a month, just because I was like, okay, great, let's take it seriously. And it was quite overwhelming, but that's basically where that podcast took off. Is that I was doing pretty well on a platform that nobody really in the industry believed in. They're like, hey, you can't make money on this, and people only want to pay you like $100 a month or whatever it may be. And so that kind of that was honestly my entry point. That one interview that you saw was my entry point to a lot more people in the industry going, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, man, I love hearing that success story. Just being able to, start with a passion, put yourself out there, not being afraid to fail, and providing great value and services, and then now you're running your own agency. So that's awesome, man. So I guess from there, from Upwork to running your own agency, like how hard was that transition?
I would say honestly, the transition was fairly easy. The reason being was that at that time, which was towards the tail end of 2017, which is when that interview was recorded, um, I was at the time I was only working a couple hours a week at the agency that I was working for. So over time, I went from full time down to part time to eventually at some point no time, and I already had the client base. I already had the experience and knowledge of what an agency looks like from the inside. There were certainly things that I should have taken note of that I simply didn't, which I had to learn the hard way. But it is what it is.
Right.
And so early on in 2018, so December 2017, I left. I was completely on my own, and around February 2018 was when I was just like, okay, I took about 2 months or so to actually think what's the next step for me. I was like, okay, let's transition into an agency. I thought I had done what I wanted to achieve on the freelancing side of things. And now I wanted to kind of do what I would consider the next level for me personally. And so I decided, okay, now we're going to do things over an agency. Because I had the experience, making that transition was honestly pretty easy. There are certain things that I've of course learned along the way, but going from that initial like, hey, I'm by myself to hey, there's now other people going to be involved with that in and of itself wasn't all that difficult, just because I had the client base already. I had the source of where to get clients from, and I had the experience of what it looks like to be in and operate within an agency, because I was lucky enough to be on the management team and the leadership team of that agency prior.
Yeah, I love that because as you kind of talk through that, it resonated with me because that's exactly how I got
Mm.
involved in the marketing realm, which is working for a few agencies and then learning some of the processes and systems, falling in love with it, and then took a leap of faith and jumped out on my own and like you're able to take all that experience and then apply it to really helping clients at a more personal level. So most people don't know what this podcast episode is about yet unless they read the title. But so how, like it's more focused on Google Ads. So like how did you get into Google Ads? How did that become your passion for your agency currently? Is that the main focus, or are you tying in SEO and some other marketing strategies?
Yes. So I've been doing some Google Ads work on and off for about 5 years. It was, as I was doing some marketing, it was like the occasional thing that I would work on. And over time, what happened was just more and more often we would end up in accounts. And so I would just had to do more research. And as I understood more and more about it, I was just like, okay, well, maybe I should investigate this to be something that we offered. So I actually studied it since we initially incorporated. So about 2 years, I studied Google Ads before we actually offered it as a service. And for about the past year and a half, we've been offering as a service. Why I wanted to do that was it complements SEO quite well.
Yeah.
Also, I tell people quite often there's no reason why you should invest in SEO if you aren't already running a profitable PPC campaign. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We can dive deeper into that if you want to, but it was just a very good a complement to it. The A lot of the spend goes towards Google instead of towards us, so it was an easier sell for us as well. And so it was a great entry point where we could take people and go, okay, you don't have the biggest budget in the world. It's honestly just not viable at SEO for you for this point, but we can work with you on Google Ads, scale up your Google Ads budget as you start to get success from that, and then use the profit gained from the Google Ads campaign and use that profit to then plug into the SEO campaign. So you're not, spending depending on the business, that 1, 5, in more competitive areas, 8 to 10 grand a month on SEO. That's just out of your pocket. Now you're using the funds that you're already gaining from that 20,000 extra a month that you're making from your Google Ads campaign to fund that SEO campaign. So it was a really great transition, and it just took a long time because I'd focused on SEO so heavily that I wanted to make sure that I was able to offer at a certain caliber level from the get go. But also, despite how much time I really looked at it, it was still, I did not prepare nearly as enough for just how much it would change internally, how much more complicated things would get.
Right.
But ultimately, it was a good change. And right now, we have about 2 to 3 times the number of PPC accounts that we have SEO accounts, but SEO still takes up about 70% of our overall revenue just because of the discrepancy of just how much more expensive SEO is.
Right, right. And those are every time you talk about SEO and PPC, because as a marketing agency, that's what we offer as well.
Mhm.
But it's so funny how you talked about, your like what you did as a kind of a expert to learn PPC before you offered it. Funny story. So before we offered it in our agency, I spent a year, learning and managing my own agency's PPC account,
Mhm.
and then calling Google Ads customer support pretty much every single day just to get them, because they do have great customer service, and they would pretty much tell you any and everything. So if you so what I did was I literally just called them every single day, help getting them to help me optimize our own agency account, and then it just blossomed from there, learning all the specific details. So it's just funny that we're kind of in the same we had the same experience with kind of making sure that we knew the ins and outs of ad campaigns to be able to offer it to our customers. Um, so let's dive into Google Ads. So I love that have that experience, and you're using it as a service, and providing value to your clients. A lot of what we hear in terms of Google Ads is most most agencies run it at a very basic level, meaning like it is dentist or let's say pharmacist in that location. They're using those simple keywords in their title tags and all that good stuff, which is fine. But I think you have to be creative on the messaging, and the targeting, because every like a lot of agencies are running ads for their clients. But to get more granular, do you focus on ad scripts as it relates to bidding strategies, or competitor analysis, to be able to run these scripts pretty much automatically to produce value and add better results than your average agency?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of automation. If you look into me a little bit, you'll see that I constantly talk about automation. I'm a massive fan of just coding in general. It's just something that I enjoy as a hobby. Now, despite that, I'm still very slow to actually implement new scripts. The reason being is that there are a lot of different things, especially on the bidding side, where do A because of B isn't necessarily let me just give you an example because I'm not sure I'm going to explain this in the best direction. Let's
Okay.
say with bidding, you might have a script that says, if I'm not getting clicks from this keyword, increase the bid. And the reason behind that is, well, we're not bidding enough to actually get those clicks. But there could be a number of reasons why you're actually not getting that. You could have an issue where you accidentally turned off all your ads. The ads were just paused, but the keyword was left on. There could be a quality score issue where you have a really low quality score, but your competitors have a higher one. And so Google just isn't happy enough to actually give you the impression share. So that could be a reason. But on the other side of things, if you're looking at why can we decrease our clicks, maybe you have a target CPA or a target cost per conversion of, let's say, $50, and you
Okay.
say, hey, if we're above $50 on average for the past 30 days, we're going to lower by 10% our bid. Well, the challenge with that is it's not necessarily the keyword or the bid as to why you are not achieving your target CPA. It could be that you're advertising 7 days a week, and one or two of those days on average are a lot more expensive than others. And so actually you should add a negative bid adjustment to those days of the week, or within a certain zip code or area or location, or to a certain demographic or to a certain audience that you're targeting. Let's say you are a therapist. Well, there might be a big difference in people who are coming to you that have kids that don't have kids. Their therapy might be a lot more serious to them if they also have to imagine, how does this affect their children? They might be a lot more likely to actually sign on with you. And so because of that, you might find that they have a much lower CPA, in which case, you might want to lower the, doesn't have kids. So those are a couple of reasons why, specifically with bidding scripts, I'm very, very careful. And I almost always turn those off when I look at a campaign, because there's just so many different reasons, especially when you're testing bids or you're testing different bid strategies, then those scripts can just really mess with that as well. So bidding specifically is something that I'm not the biggest fan for scripts for. When it comes to something like competitors, or running a script around like your auction insights to see who else is showing up quite often, what other websites we're competing with, for very competitive areas, I like those because there's just so many people coming in and out. It can be worth keeping in mind. But if you're a smaller advertiser, fairly small budget, you're not in in one of the biggest metros areas where there's like 300 different people that do what you do, then I find that there's not always a ton of actionable data. I'm a really big fan of scripts for like statistical analysis for like A/B testing ads and things like that. But specifically with bidding, and there's some great scripts and there's some not great scripts, but that's just my opinion.
Oh, that's awesome, man. And really, really great insights. You got really granular with your explanation on that. So I appreciate that. So I can imagine, based on just being able to adjust and make sure the campaign is running at its optimal level, how important is it for you to gather as much information up front from the client to be able to, make those bid adjustments on a daily basis or a weekly basis? Because what we'll find with clients, right, like they'll just say, hey, run my ads, right? Like, and it's just like, well, no, we can't just run your ads. We need to understand your audience. We need to understand, what days you're open. We need to understand your demographic. Like, we need to understand all these things, your messaging. So like, how much information and how much time do you spend collecting, insights up front about the client to be able to do all those things you just mentioned?
Yeah, so when we first started offering Google Ads, we did a very basic build process where it was just basically, what days are you open, what services do you want to advertise, where do you want to advertise them, so on and so forth. And that's now in my opinion, that's unfortunately where most people kind of stop. Now we have a much more robust period where sometimes our build will take, depending on the size of the account. Right now I'm estimating more about like 2 weeks or so. To large advertisers it might be a couple months, if especially if they've already been spending for like years and they spend like 20 grand a month. It's going to take a while to figure what is actually going on within their account.
Right,
But for a lot of people, before we even start building the campaigns, that's still the building the campaigns takes like 3-4 days. The actual research process probably takes about a week and a half, where we're sitting down and we go through an initial onboarding process where we have a bunch of standard questions, but we also customize those questions based on the client and based on just during the call. It's about an hour-long call. We ask them a bunch of questions. What's the difference between you and your competitors? Some clients, as I'm sure you get this as well, some clients are great and they open up and they tell you everything that you would want to know.
right.
Other, you get one-word answers and it's like pulling teeth trying to get some information from people. But the
Yep.
more information we get, the better the campaign is, and then we can craft that. For example, we might find for a practice that we actually did this for our practice earlier today. They're a therapist. We found out that there are certain certifications that they have. They're the only one in the entire state that has them. They told us about how they train with very notable people in their field that only 20 other people have been able to do, and they've been published in these certain publications. We're able to take all that information and then translate that into the ad campaign. We're able to segment based on different audiences and so on and so forth. So a lot of our first initial week and a half process is scoping out what sections and content do we want on that landing page based off what's specific about them. How are competitors advertising? What are we seeing from them? How can we translate what the client's telling us about their business into an ad campaign? Because ultimately they know their business way better than we ever will. So a
Right.
lot of our initial process is gathering that information, building that into an actual media strategy, getting that approved, and then the actual build process of taking that information and doing a lot of copy and pasting here's the ad copy, here's the ad group, etc. That doesn't take a whole lot of time, right? Especially if you're using the ads editor. The landing page itself will take like a week to build, but that's the designer has to have the time to do that. But
Right.
so taking that week and a half process drives a much better result, and we especially early on we get much better early on results, and it translates much later on because there's a lot of information that we might learn over time that we can figure that out with a 10-minute explanation of something.
That's awesome. It sounds like you guys are very similar to us. You get very granular and detailed and just gathering and collecting and doing research to be able to produce, because they're spending money, right? Like like most of these businesses, if they're a smaller local business, that every dollar counts as it relates to getting new patients and visibility. So you mentioned earlier about SEO and PPC, right? Like, so I love that you combine those together, and then your goal is to taper PPC off as they get more or get higher ranking and higher visibility in the search results. As it relates to, let's say, a startup medical practice, right? Um, they're brand new, right? Like they want to invest little to get the the fastest results. SEO, as we all know, is very competitive. It takes it's a much longer process to get top 3 rankings or wherever the goal is. But as you bring in the PPC strategy with Google Ads, How do you help them get into that local 3-pack with their PPC ad campaign? Is there a real focus strategy that you target there?
Yeah. So one of the challenges with specifically the map ads. So one way, again, they're the most common way is setting up your location extension, which allows you to be eligible for your ads to show up there because you have to verify they actually own that GMB, so on and so forth. Now, the local ads and the map pack in general is supposed to be based off of geography. If you're on a desktop computer, the way that Google localizes that is by zip code. If you're on your mobile phone, Google uses the actual GPS coordinates, so longitude and latitude, to locate where you actually are. And Google has a very uh, heavy proximity favor, meaning that the further away you are from a location means the less likely you are to show up.
Right.
So if your actual offices are not in a high population density area, your ads might not show up very often in the maps. If you're down some industrial road that's all commercial, there might not be a whole lot of people that are actually in that area. So you might not show up in the map rankings very often because Google's going to look at that and go, well, you're not actually close. Here's these 15 other practices that are much closer. And even if someone is willing to travel 2 hours to you, maybe you're very renowned in what you do, or someone's willing to travel 15, 20 minutes or whatever it may be, Google still favors proximity a lot more than it probably will in the future. But that's the world that we're living in right now. So that's one thing that you can't really control, but by having the location extension on your account that enables you to have that shown. Another thing that you can do, which I believe was only rolled out this year, was the actual local ad campaigns. So it's a whole different, it's not search ads, it's a whole local ad campaign. We're still testing it. I can't say exactly, whether I like it or not necessarily. The
Yeah.
goal of it really is to drive foot traffic to more so retail locations, but your ads still show up in the map. You still see the call button and the direction button, etc. So this is one of the reasons why we're still testing, because it's really not intended for like lead gen in that way. It's more intended for foot traffic,
Yeah.
but you still get in there. It's a campaign specifically focused for having you show up within Google Maps.
Awesome, awesome. That's really, really good insights. And I think the key to your point there is if it's just your general campaign strategy, that GMB connection to that local extension is top priority. As it relates to local businesses, what have you seen to be the best bidding strategy for conversions? I mean, there's so many, right? Like
Mm.
there's manual bidding, there's more automatic bidding strategies, top of page impressions. There's just so many. Like for a local business, what have you seen to be the best bidding strategy for conversions?
Yeah. So for just about every type of business, there's only three bidding strategies I really ever use.
Right.
So one of my personal favorites, especially for new campaigns, which I think gets too much gets looked down on a lot within the industry, but is actually one of my favorites, is max clicks. Now this used to get a really bad rap, and a lot of people are still on this. Start day one for manual cost per click, and I'll explain in a minute why I think that's not advisable to start off with manual cost per click. But one of the things you get with max cost per click is Google says, you're telling Google, hey, give me the most amount of clicks that I possibly can. Now, this means that you might not get clicks on the most competitive keywords that you're bidding on, depending on what your budget is. Because if your most competitive keyword costs $25 a click and your budget is $25 a day, Google's not going to be very incentivized to give you one click a day when you're trying to maximize clicks. The reason why I like to start off with maximize clicks is because what this does is this allows you to get the most amount of data possible within your account. If you are a new advertiser, your goal ultimately is not leads. Your goal is data, because you need to use that data to refine how you're actually getting leads in the first place. You do not know what are your best days of the week, what are your best times a day, what are your best demographics and audiences, et cetera. You can guess from your other marketing channels and just general people working 9 to 5 probably aren't going to contact you 9 to 5 very often, but you can take guesses there, but you don't actually know. And so your big goal initially is to collect data so you can figure a lot of that stuff out. And so the more clicks you get, the more data you get. So I want to maximize the number of clicks that I can get as fast as possible. And so sometimes it may also be advisable. It's actually I've convinced very few people of this, but can be advisable to actually start off with a much larger budget than you actually want per month, and then taper that down pretty quickly just so you get the clicks. Where if you're spending, $1,000 a month, it may be worth to start off with your first month at 2,500 a month, just so that you get an extra, you get 2.5 months worth of data within 1 month. And then you can taper that down to 1,000, and then you can continue from there. Again, like I said, it's very hard to convince people to do that,
Right.
but that is something that can work quite well. So I like starting off with max clicks because it gives me a lot of clicks, and you still get conversions from that. What I like to do from there
Hey, Jared, real,
is
real quick to that question. Don't mean to interrupt, but like how long do you run max clicks to kind of gather that data that you need?
Very dependent on the ad budget and what the ads cost per click is. Typically, what I'm looking for is to start getting in conversions and for me to have a general feel of what I should expect with this account, which it's one of those more like emotional rather than analytical things, just from experience of, do I feel good about this account? But my initial optimizations that I want to make outside of bidding is I don't want to spend a ton of time with bidding initially because that's where messing with your bidding is very granular, especially when you get to manual cost per click. So when I'm at max clicks, what I'm more so looking at is do I have the right account structure? Do I need to break these keywords into more ad groups? Am I getting a good CTR? Do I need to rewrite the ads? Is my landing page converting in the first place? That's one of the biggest things I'm looking at, especially because we build the landing pages. So if the landing pages don't work, it's on us. It's not the client's fault for an issue with their website or whatever it may be. So I would love to have an exact date and time, but for some people, it might be a couple weeks. For others, it might be a couple months. But I do try to get out of max clicks as fast as possible, just because of the other two that I'll mention, it typically doesn't have the best results long term.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Awesome.
So from max clicks, what I like to move to from there is generally target CPA or target cost per acquisition. What this does, it sets a target goal for you to get a cost per conversion within, and then Google tries to stay within that. And the reason why I don't start with this initially is that you need to have the data to understand what a good target CPA is, and you get that data from max clicks. So the
Mhm.
max clicks will tell you, okay, great, we got a depending on the type of practice, maybe it's a $20 CPA, maybe it's a $200 CPA, if you're doing like something more high end, like plastic surgery, so on and so forth.
Right.
So you might see that, maybe for whatever practice type you are, $50 CPA is what you're getting. Well, I might start off, give Google a little bit of leniency, and I'll go, okay, get me a $55 cost per acquisition. So I give it a little bit more room for Google to learn because the automated bidding has a learning cycle from Google where their automated systems kind of go to work.
Yeah.
And so what I do with the target CPA over time is my bidding strategy for there is to just slowly lower the CPA to see how far I can go it with also getting the volume that I need. Because you might be able to get leads for $1, but if there's only one possible way for you to get leads for $1, you can only get one lead a month. Well, it doesn't really matter if you can get that lead for $1. At that point, it's just not worth it for you.
Right.
So finding the balance between low CPA and whatever volume the practice is looking for. And so once I kind of find that balance, then if I want to get more granular, I'll move on to manual cost per click because now I know what cost per click gets me that target CPA, and I can then optimize from there. Now, what I will say on the manual cost per click front is that Google's moving more and more towards automation, specifically on the bidding front. So
Yeah.
I use manual cost per click less often, just because eventually I wouldn't be surprised if 3 to 5 years from now, manual cost per click was very discouraged by Google. I mean, already when setting up campaigns, they really try to hide manual cost per click from you.
Yeah.
But so embracing automation more and more, and the more keywords you have, the less of realistic manual cost per click really is for you.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And so, do you ever switch to max conversions at any point?
Sometimes we'll certainly test just about everything. The only one I very rarely use is target impression share. That's a very specific case where I'll use that. But with maximized conversions, what I find is that the 99 out of 100 times, I almost always find that the CPA ends up being higher than target CPA.
Yeah.
But it is something where if we feel as though that we're just not hitting a certain goal, or we're just kind of looking at an account and the account's pretty stable, and we're like, well, what haven't we thrown at it yet? We'll see what happens. But it's if you could look through all of our accounts, and it'll be very, very rare that you would see that in use.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. Thanks for providing so much detail. 'Cause I think with any PPC campaign, like a lot of it's testing, a lot of it's looking at how the data is performing and then making adjustments as any analyst would do. So thank you for getting granular with that, with those insights. So as it relates to ad type,
Mm.
what type of strategies do you focus on? Is it more, especially with a local business, they want foot traffic and then they want calls. Do you run an expanded text ad campaign and then kind of see which devices perform better, or do you start off with call only to just drive calls on a smartphone? Just curious of kind of your ad type strategy.
Yeah. So when it comes to ad types, specifically for call only, very, very rarely use, kind of to the same extent of maximize conversions. Even if you're looking for calls primarily, there are a couple things I really don't like about the call only campaigns. Is one is that your cost per click is going to be very high because there's no landing page. There is a lot less ad copy. And because of that, your quality score is always lower compared to a text ad. And the lower your quality score, the higher your cost per click. And it does make sense. Like, hey, most people would be willing to pay much more for a phone call than they are for a click. And that makes plenty of sense. The challenges with call only ads that I found is that uh, on average, I'm seeing about 2 to 3 clicks for an actual call because you still get charged per click whenever someone clicks on the call button. But what happens is when somebody clicks on call, they then get a pop up that says, do you actually want to call that? And the average person is not expecting that pop up and they aren't ready to actually call you. And so they click back and they think that they misclick something. So they click it again and then, it's whatever it may be. Or they click, they don't read, then they click call and they're like, why am I on a phone call? So I'll just hang up. So the actual phone call I tend to find is much more expensive. And I tend to find that you still get, just as many phone calls as you want, just sending them to a landing page and just making the phone number huge. Like you can't miss it. Just making the phone number really big, if you really don't want form fills, put the form at the bottom. Or for like emergency type services, if you're like an emergency dentist, you don't have to have a form because no one's going to fill out the form. You can just have the phone number there and, your address, so on and so forth. But for even on going after calls, I just don't like call only campaigns. I was calling ads rather. And actually on that point, if I do call only ads, I typically break them out into a separate campaign. For the other ad types, expanded text ads, I like, especially using the dynamic keyword insertion into the ads. It allows me to have much more keywords within one single ad group without having to do something
Right.
like a single keyword ad group, which I'm just not that big of a fan of. It's just so much more work to manage, and it makes cross testing with your ads a lot harder. You have to do a lot more data analysis in something like Excel or Google Sheets. So
Right.
I like using the dynamic keyword insertion, which for anyone listening is doing this yourself, curly braces, open up the curly braces. I think you have to type keyword or it might auto prompt your keyword. And then you basically what it does is just replaces whatever the person searched for with that ad space, and then you have a default text to default something relevant. So what this does is it keeps the quality score very high because you always have the exact thing that somebody searched for, assuming it wasn't too long or if it had any personal identifiable information, Google added in there. But your quality score stays very high, so you can have a lot more keywords within one ad group, within an expanded text ad. Responsive search ads, I'm getting more and more used to, especially now that we can actually pin headlines. Because you basically, for anyone that doesn't know, you have a bunch of headlines in there. I think you are allowed up to 10, and then Google just swaps, what headlines are where.
Right.
I like using those as expanded text ads that automatically do my A/B testing for me. So let me pin headline 1, let me pin headline 3, and let me just add 8 things that could be headline 2, and then I have one ad, but it's already testing for me. So that's I like that a lot. Or maybe I'll be testing 2 and 3, but keeping 1 the same, or whatever it may be. So expanded text ads, responsive search ads. I'm fairly comfortable with both.
That's awesome, man. And back to your point about call only ads, what a lot of marketers may not realize, or even businesses, is that you can set up conversions for Google Ads. And let's say you set it up, to show a call 60 seconds or less, or 60 seconds or more, right? And if a call's drop, it's most likely 60 seconds or less. So Google's still going to charge you, and that really is not a conversion, but you can measure that and still show a client, and they may not know the difference, but they're spending money where they're not really getting, to your point, the customer may be clicking and not expecting that pop up, and then don't even call. So, or call and then accidentally call and then hang up. So
Right.
yeah, to your point, I love what you're talking about with just making sure that your ads are very keyword specific. And then also to the title, you can do a lot of A/B testing with your dynamic insertions, and then also your responsive ads. Last question for you, Jarod, as it relates to keywords. So there's all type of concepts. Some people get very granular and use only a small pool of keywords that's very relevant to that ad copy. And then there's you use a bank of keywords, and there's all type of different keyword matches, broad match modifier, phrase, and so forth. What's your keyword strategy to make sure that your ads are super relevant, but however the user is searching, you're making sure that your ad is showing up for those targeted keywords?
Yeah, so by default, what I like to do is use broad match, modified, phrase, and exact. I'll throw all three variations of the same keyword in there. Depending on what the term is, sometimes some may not be viable. So sometimes it might be too long of a phrase for broad match, modified to really make sense, or it might be too short of a phrase for exact match to make sense, or whatever it may be. So there is some sort of just like double checking, so we're not going to waste money on it. But most keywords will get those three variations. I never use phrase match modified. I honestly don't know why it exists. I've never found a use for it ever. I've never talked to anyone that really found a use for it either. Um, and depending on the budget, depending on the location, so how competitive it is, and the the types of services that are being offered. Sometimes it's a service that most people don't know what it's actually called, so people search in a bunch of different ways. That kind of dictates whether just pure broad match is going to be viable. And so when it comes to pure broad match, just because they can be super broad, Google's gotten a lot better over the years of understanding search intent.
Yeah.
But those are something that we're using pretty sparingly for in general, using it more for data collection. Like, hey, we haven't been able to find any additional keywords. Let's throw, you know, dermatologist near me into like a broad match, or like a best dermatologist, or dermatologist in Lexington, or whatever it may be, into a broad match that's still specific enough so Google's not going to give us necessarily a bunch of crap, and let's just see what we're able to get from there. If we get anything good from it, let's break that out into its own keyword. If it's just a massive crapshoot, let's just turn it off because we don't want to waste a bunch of money. So we do use broad match, but very, very sparingly. um, Now, something that I did actually want to go back on, unless you have a follow up, but I want, because you made a very
Okay.
important point, was when we were talking about the call only ads, you mentioned how conversions are tracked. Now, not to get too off the road, but this is really, really important, and I appreciate that you brought it up. Is that you control how your conversions actually look within your account. There are so many switches that control what your conversions are. Your click through conversion window, your view through conversion window, your attribution model, whether or not you're importing from Google Analytics versus building it right into Google Ads because they track conversions differently. If you're setting your call time to a certain time metric, etc., is that, and it can be used. So depending on how you actually set that up will depend on the actual data that you get within your account.
Right.
And some people may use that in a sneaky way. So if you're doing your own stuff or whatever it may be, audit that for sure. Like by default, last click attribution. I'm a fan of position based. Some people prefer time decay, or I can't remember the one that's 40/40 and the 20 in the middle. But um, uh, there are so many switches in there that changes how your actual data is portrayed. And so that's something that I think that most people don't actually look at, even includes in conversions. That's something as well, where by default, you might have clicks to call being tracked as a conversion. But if you're also using something like CallRail, well, that's going to report within your phone call conversion. So you might be double reporting on your phone calls from Maps if
Yep.
you are using your Google Ads number extension within your Google Maps. So that's another thing that I very often see an increase in conversions. Count every conversion versus count one. But sorry to bring you off the trails, but you said that earlier. It's just been rolling around in my mind.
No, no worries, man. Throw as much advice and feedback. I love your knowledge and expertise. Um, so going back to keywords, so just explain to the audience. So like most people don't know what broad match or phrase is. So like for example, putting plus signs in front of your keywords, that keyword has to show up. It can show up in any, or the user can search that keyword in any way, and as long as it has those two keywords or whatever keywords that you have with the plus symbols in front, that your ad would show up. But just kind of enlighten the audience on what those different those keyword matches are.
Yeah, sure. So the keyword matches are just a way for Google to understand how specific you want to be with the search terms that you get. So the keywords that you put into Google tell Google the types of searches you want to show up for. And then your search terms, which is a different report within Google Ads, is actually what somebody searched for when they actually ended up clicking on your ad. And the reason why there's a distinction here is because Google knows nobody wants to put 4,000 different keywords into it would just be a mess. And so what happens is, starting from the most precise to the least precise type of match type, is you have exact keywords, or since about sometime in 2019, exact ish keywords. Google
Yeah.
takes some leniency with that. But if you type in, if you have, let's say, doctor, well, Google can look at that and go, okay, well, DR, we believe that stands for doctor, or Google understands that it does. And so if someone searches for a DR near me, you might still show up for that. And you're probably not bidding on something general like doctor near me, but to that extent, So Google would also likely understand if you put in dermatologist, someone types in skin doctor. Sometimes Google gets it right, sometimes Google doesn't, but Google understands like this is basically the same thing. But Google's very specific when it has it's exact, where I want something that's basically this term and I want to show up for just that. It's very restrictive. And so you're going to get the least amount of actual clicks for it, but you're going to have the most granular control over that individual search term. Next is phrase match, which says that all of these terms have to be in the same order within the same string or the same text. And so if you have, let's say, dermatologist near me, someone has to type in dermatologist near me. There can be words before or after it. So best dermatologist near me or dermatologist near me within 5 minutes or whatever it may be. You could show up for both of those. It's the second most restrictive form. Again, it's also similar match. So if someone types in skin doctor near me, you might still show up for that. So Google, again, takes some leniency with it, but it gives you a much more control over it. Phrase match, in my opinion, is generally the best search term just because you get the kind of the middle ground. And then you have the broad match modified, which says all of these words or words similar to these words have to appear in the search term in any order. So what is a good doctor near me? Could, if you type in good near me, though you wouldn't really do that, even though they're not right next to each other, you could still show up for that. So what it allows you to do is kind of find other ways that people will search using the same terms, but in different orders or, different structures, so on and so forth.
Awesome. So I think you mentioned earlier, just remind me and refresh my memory if this is what you do. So like if it's dentist Lexington, do you use broad match, phrase, and exact all in your keyword bank for that same keyword?
Yes. So what I'll do is within the same ad group, I might have just a general dentist ad group. So I might have like dentist near me, dentist in city, a dentist cities nearby if they only have one location. And I might have all those different terms, those root terms within the same ad group. And then what I do is I just copy and paste that twice, one being the broad match modified, so with a plus sign in front of each word, one being the phrase match, so with quotations on either side, and one being the exact match. And so what I can see from there is how do each of these perform. I might find that sometimes broad match modify is just too broad for this, or I might find that exact match just isn't relevant. Just the term dentist in and of itself by itself and nothing else there, that's way too broad to really be worth anything. So that's not a good exact match term, but it might be worth to have as just a general broad match term if you wanted to do market research on, what are other terms that people use that are around dentist, so on and so forth.
Awesome, awesome. No, that's super helpful. And then I did have one last question for
Yeah,
you, if
go
you
for
don't mind. Smart campaigns, like, do you use those? Why or why not?
it. To say it nicely, they're basically real campaigns with training wheels. So smart campaigns are a good move by Google in terms of getting more people into Google Ads, in terms of increasing their overall profitability, and it's great for their shareholdership. But ultimately, you have very little control over a lot of the elements within your ad campaign with smart ads, and you get very little data out of it as well. So even if you're DIYing, I would say it's only okay if you're DIYing. And the reason that I say that is because a simple Google search gives you much better information. You can type in any sort of business into YouTube, and with Google Ads, you can type in, lawyer Google Ads or criminal defense lawyer Google Ads or dermatologist Google Ads or surgeon Google Ads, so on and so forth. And you'll find somebody step by step walking through it. It might not be the most complex build. You might not get everything you need out of that, but you'll
Yeah,
be able to set up probably a better campaign than the smart ads would ever be able to give you. So I'm just really not a fan of them. But I understand why they're there.
yeah, no, I'm right there with you. So Jared, hey man, I appreciate all the valuable insights. I mean, this is probably one of the best episodes I've had because you got real granular with just the detail. And I think as people watch interviews, they want to know how to do something. So I think you really kind of created a vision and a map. And I'm sure there's things they're going to have to learn in between all that. But I appreciate you're really getting granular with your conversation and details. Any last words, for let's say a new entrepreneur or that may be trying to do freelance or run an agency, or even, a business owner that needs help with marketing? Would just love, to provide a few last thoughts.
Yeah. So for both camps, whether you're on an agency side or freelance side, or whether you are a business owner that wants to get in ads, um, take it seriously. That's my best advice is information has been made free since the internet has existed. There's nothing that you can't learn for free nowadays. It's just a matter of putting in the time and finding the resources. Just take it seriously. Don't set up your own ad campaign just following the Google automated thing and expect that everything does what it says on the box. Because a lot of things, they say one thing, but it's actually a lot more complicated. But Google doesn't want to spend a paragraph when they need to put something within 3 words.
Right.
So understand what things actually mean. Look at, if you want to set up your own ads, watch a video and, I probably watched like 4 or 5 hours worth of videos on just understanding like the Google Ads interface before I was, really diving into it, because I wanted to understand where everything is and how it looks and how it works. And, reading the documentation from Google, which is actually pretty good. If you go to their help documentation of how does a broad match modified actually work? How does Google actually calculate the household income within the income brackets and so on and so forth. So just taking it seriously. Same thing if you're on the freelancer agency side of things. Do research, ask questions, pay people smarter than you for consultations. If you don't know, if you don't know much about Google Ads, pay someone that knows Google Ads to sit down with you for a consultation, or pay somebody that runs their agency. If you're like, hey, project management, it's a bit of a pain, pay somebody that has figured that out to figure that out for you. You either have time or money. If you have money, then use that money to free up your time.
Right. It makes sense too, right? Like you can skip some of the hurdles that you're going to face if you pay someone who has that expertise. One last question. Do you provide any PPC consultation or any kind of training services?
So I do some amount of consulting. It really depends on the situation, to be honest, just because it takes up quite a bit of time, because there's the whole like prep for, then there's the post work after it. So there is some, but I tend to find that for agencies, I do a lot more consulting than for business owners, because I tend to find that I get on a call and they're like, just do this for me if I already have you here. So consulting, I do a little bit, more so on the agency side than on the business side.
Awesome. I appreciate that, man. So if you guys, if you're listening to this podcast episode, Jarod with Comet Fuel, he just laid it all out. Google Ads expert. We love having you on this episode, and we look forward to getting this out there and distributing. And Jarod, please, at any point, don't hesitate to get back on here. I think your story is amazing. Just going from a freelancer to running your own agency to being the expert you are now. So again, thank you for your time today, and we will see you guys next time.